Hi, everyone. Just walking you through the next batch of vocabulary words for your memorization and knowledge. So I'm beginning on page 60. And again, if there are multiple forms here, um, I have just picked one form for you to learn, but it's good to compare what I'm having you learn to what else is on the page just to help you get a sense of the language. So our first word is achar, which means after or behind. Our next word is el, which means unto, into, to, or toward. So this word speaks primarily of spatial movement. So, for example, if you're going to Jerusalem, you would use this form el. And then there's a dash, and then the next word would be Jerusalem or Yerushalayim in Biblical Hebrew. So it either appears with this dash, and most commonly appears with this dash, so to a place or to a person, which will follow it. It can also appear with something that we'll learn later called a personal pronoun. So you can also tack on a suffix to this to make words like to me, to him, to you, to them, etc. But for right now, we're just learning this as to. So L's to or toward. Our next one is another in our words that are prepositions and not nouns. So we're kind of moving on to a new part of the language. And this one is buh. So pretty easy, buh. And I should let you know up front that Biblical Hebrew is a very, what I would call a sort of sparse or a very focused or intensive language. So, Biblical Hebrew, both in its narration and in its writing, tend to be very concise or compact. So, excuse me. So, the upshot of all that is that Biblical Hebrew probably doesn't have quite enough prepositions. So we're used to lots of prepositions to choose from in English to talk about things very, I don't know, in what to us is a very precise way. But single prepositions have to carry a lot of weight in Biblical Hebrew. So but can mean in or with or by or among or through or as. So you have to kind of get a sense of what all the possibilities are and pick the one that makes the most sense in your situation. Another thing that you should know about "ba" is that it will always or almost always attach to um, the word that follows it. So you'll never see "ba" just sort of hanging out there like you see it on the screen right now. It's always attached on to the front of a word, or like L that we just had, it can also have um, personal pronoun suffixes. So, like to me, to, or with me, with you, with him, with them, with her, etc. But most often it'll be just smashed onto the front of a word. So you'll never see it by itself like it's here. Our next word is bane, which means between. So it's used to explain, I don't know, spatially between something and something else. And you'll notice in the book, Hebrew has an idiom, which is a way of saying something in a language that's maybe unique to that language. And so when you are talking about being between something and something else, you use the expression bane and then followed by uh, the one side of the spatial relationship, and uvein, which just means and between something else. So it's bane something, uvein something else. But for this particular quiz, you just need to know that bane means between. Next word is ka, which means like, as, about, which is probably most often like our sense of about in approximately, so something like or about X number of people went to do something, can also mean according to. Like ba, ka also attaches to the front of words, so you'll never just see it sort of hanging out there like you see it here. And next we have le, to, for, in regard to, with reference to. So probably just memorize to or for is your best bet when encountering a le. And like ka and ba, le also most often attaches to the beginnings of other words, but like ka and ba, it can also have personal pronouns. So you can um, turn le into words that mean things like to me, to her, to them, to us, in the sense of maybe giving something to someone else rather than travel, like the word L. So L is spatial movement, la is just I did this uh, to him or for him, something like that. Next word, very common, is lifnei. And lifnei means before, and in the sense of before in time. So I did something before I did something else. So lifnei can be used as before in that sense, but lifnei also is used um, in a spatial sense where somebody appears before someone else. So it's so somebody is summoned by King David, and this servant appears before him. So lifnei would be used in that sense as well. And here, a few things in the book are probably helpful, meaning that you can say things like al panay, meaning on the surface of. So panay is a form of the word for face, and al panay just really means on the face of or on the surface of. Um, Again, you don't need to know that for the quiz, but some of those forms are kind of interesting and might be helpful to you. So panay really means the face of in that usage there. Our next word is mean, which means from, away from, out of, some of, because of. So again, these simple prepositions have to do lots of duties and stand in lots of places. Now, mean is kind of special because it can appear as you see it on its screen with the dash like this, but it can also be attached to nouns like we went um, from the city, so away from the city. And when it's attached to the beginnings of nouns, note that second letter of the preposition mean is a nun, and you might recall from all of our work on roots that when nuns encounter other forms, they tend to drop out. So that is the case when oftentimes when mean gets attached to words, the nun goes away. So you'll just see something like meh instead of mean. But it can also and will oftentimes appear in the form that you see it on your screen here with the dash. Neged just means in front of or across from. Ad means as far as or until, so we are only going as far as X point in the desert. That's something that ad can be used for. Or um, also, you can use this in the sense of time. So we are going to do this until something happens. So ad can stand for that as well. Next, we have our preposition all, which means upon, on, over, concerning, besides, against. Again, our prepositions have to do lots of work and lots of context. But generally speaking, all just means on something on top of something else. And it can also have a very, um, I would say, metaphorical use. So we would say, if I want to try to get somebody to do something, I might put pressure on them. Now, I'm not literally putting something on them, an object on them, but I'm kind of trying to convince them or talk them into something. So in that type of situation, all would probably be used in the biblical text. So if we are oppressing somebody, they might be oppressed all. Um, so the person being oppressed might be expressed with the expression all. So it can have those wide range of meanings. Then our next word is tachat, which means under, beneath, instead of, or in place of. So sometimes when kings die, for example, we can say that so and so reigned in the stead of someone else, or instead of, or replaced by somebody else. This preposition tachat would be used for that, but it can also mean the normal way that we think of under, so that something is spatially underneath something else. Next, we're going to flip back and look at some of the vocabulary on page 21. So we're doing prepositions this week and also going back and looking at a few more vowels. And I know that gives you a lot of words to learn, but on the other hand, some of these words you've already encountered in at least a little bit in your memorization work for Deuteronomy 6 or your recitation work for Deuteronomy 6. So not all the words are completely new to you. So our first word is ozen, which means ear. And note that the plural is pronounced oznaim, but it's written with that annoying kametz hatuv, which is under the first syllable there and is pronounced O, even though it looks like it might be A. So I think though it, at least abstractly, it kind of makes sense that if the singular is ozen, that the plural might be also ozen, or something that sounds like ozen, in this case oznayim. And remember that that ayim ending is a dual, so words that naturally occur in pairs or things that naturally occur in pairs often have that ayim ending. Next we have a word for God, El, which is either God in the sense of another God. It can mean the God of the Bible, or it can also refer to the god El, which is the main god in the Babylonian pantheon. You might have heard of if you've studied Babylonian texts in other classes. This, however, is not the most common word for God that's in the Bible. So this word shows up a lot in the book of Job, but not so common elsewhere in the Bible. So the most common word for God in the Bible is Elohim, which is a word we've already talked about. And remember that this can refer to God in the singular or gods, not Israel's God, in the plural. So you have to kind of look at your context and look at the verbs and adjectives around this word to be really sure what the Bible is talking about. So most of the time, Elohim will take a masculine singular verb. So we know that even though the word itself looks very plural to us, it is actually a singular word. Next word is aim, which means mother. Next word is eretz, which means land, earth, or country. So it can refer to your own land, like the area around you, or it can refer to the entire earth, land mass. Dam means blood. And even though it doesn't show you this in the book, dam also has a plural, which is sort of interesting. So we don't normally think of English of blood as having a plural. But in Biblical Hebrew, blood does have a plural. And when it's used in the plural, it's, I think, always used to refer to violent acts that result in the shedding of blood. So damim are, in essence, bloody deeds. which is a little bit different than the way we think of uh, plurals in the English. Anyway, just wanted to tell you about that. You don't need to know that for the quiz. Next word is derek, which means way or road. And this can refer to a physical road or a physical path, how you get from one place to another. You go down this road. But it can also be used metaphorically in terms of the way being your way of life or the way of God. So in Deuteronomy 23, I think the text talks about God's ways are just. Um, and this word derech is used there to talk about the way or the road. So it can be a road, a real road, or a way of life. Next word is cherev, which means sword. This one is a little unusual because it's feminine, even though it doesn't look like it should be feminine, but it is feminine, so this is an exception to the rule. And notice in the book, the plural is charavot, so the plural looks very feminine, but the singular doesn't look very feminine. So sometimes we can tell by looking at the plural as well as verbs and adjectives around the word whether a word is actually feminine or masculine. Yad is a word for hand or power. So you might, I don't know, there are verses that talk about the hand of God. So that really are referring not to a physical hand that God has, but more to the power of God. And also for the Israelites, hand is something that stretches from the top of your longest finger to your elbow. So really, it's more hand and forearm considered together. So that's a little bit different than we think of hand in English. And also, the um, plural of this form is usually seen as the dual. So again, hands naturally occur in pairs. And even though this isn't shown in your book, the dual of hand, yad, is yadayim. So the dual has that ayim ending, which tells you that it's dual. Next word is the word for heart, which is more like the word mind or the center of your intention in English, so not so much the physical anatomy heart, but more of the center of your being. And heart is a little tricky because it shows up in two different forms. One is lave and one is lavav. So you might see it either way. I don't think there is any difference at all in meaning between the two. You might remember this word from your Deuteronomy 6 recitation, Bakol Lavavcha. So with all your heart, so that cha tacked onto Lavav means your. So Bakol Lavavcha. You might remember that. I don't know. That was weeks ago already, so maybe you've forgotten. But hopefully it sounds familiar. Next word is mayim, which is our normal word for water, and it also has this ayim sound to it, which means it's a dual word, and we've talked about this in class, but the logic behind water being dual is a little unclear, but it always just shows up as mayim. Don't let that bother you. Next word is mishpat, which means judgment or justice, right or custom. Sometimes I tell students that thinking of it as a legal ruling is helpful in some contexts. So, a just way of thinking about something in terms of justice being meted out. So, it can be kind of a rule or a custom or a law, but it's also the abstract idea of justice. Next word is nefesh, and is another word like cherev, and I don't think I mentioned that eretz is also a feminine word. So he's giving you all the kind of nice exceptions to the rule here. So Nefesh is also feminine, and it means yourself, your person, your breath, your will, your life force. But traditionally, it's been translated as soul, which is sort of a um, idea more from Greek philosophy than from Israelite religion, but it kind of works for us, I guess. So people have used that in the past. And you might remember this word as well from your Deuteronomy 6 recitation. Um, so perhaps you remember it with all your mind, with all your soul. B'kol levavcha uvahol nafshecha. Maybe you remember that phrase. And so it means with all your self, with all your self will. Nefesh. Next word is ayin or spring. It also has that I sound in it, but it's not ayim, it's ayin. And so it means I or spring. So this is not every I sound is dual, just ayim. So it can mean both I and spring, and what the relationship between those two are, I'm not sure. Next word is pe. Excuse me, pe just means mouth. The next word on your list, panim, we're going to skip because it never actually really appears in this way in the Bible. So it seems like a bit of a waste for you to be memorizing this. So what you will often see is pane with no mem there, and it means the face of. So I think every time the word face appears in the Bible, it's always the face of someone or something. So we're going to skip that one. Regel means foot, and the excuse me, the plural is always a dual, so raglayim. Um, so just be aware of that. And then shamayim is our word for heaven or sky, and again, always appears in the dual. But as I mentioned in class, the logic behind that is really unclear to us. I'm sure it made sense to the Israelites, but not so much to us. So, anyway, those are your words for study for the upcoming week. If you have any questions, let me know. Again, you have quite a few words, but hopefully a few are familiar, at least a little from your past. And so we have this week a mix of nouns and prepositions for your study. Good luck on your exams, and we'll see you soon.